What's your name?
Cecilia Finch.
And where were you born?
Oil City, Caddo Parish, Louisiana.
Wow. When were you born?
January the 25th, 1942.
Who were your parents and what do you remember about your parents?
My father was Jesse Jr. Tennis. He was a rig builder. My mother was Carrie Ella Pace, and she was like a clerk at Sears in the office.
Okay. When did your family come to Choctaw County since you weren't born here?
I came to Choctaw County in January 1976.
And what brought you here?
I was going to marry a local person, Lyndall Finch.
I'm assuming you married Lyndall?
Yes, I did.
Okay. How many children did you have?
I had 4 children,
Okay.
but not Lyndall's children.
Okay. As a child, growing up in Louisiana, do you remember how your family supported itself when you were a child?
Yes, I do. My daddy was a rig builder. We moved to several towns until about 1948, and my parents decided to split, and my mother and my sister and I moved to Shreveport, Louisiana. And my dad stayed in Hobbs, New Mexico, because he worked around Midland, Odessa, all those, you know, where the oil wells were.
Sounds good. Did you have brothers and sisters?
I have one sister, Marcella Ann Tennis.
And do you remember what you guys used to do in your spare
Oh,
time
yes, I do.
growing up?
We went to school, and then we would go to the park. We had a park that was near the Louisiana State Fairgrounds, and in the summer we would play tennis, go swimming, have picnics, and then we had another lake that we could go to, Caddo Lake, but we couldn't swim in it. But they had a lot of like a zoo and picnic tables and things like that. And it wasn't Caddo Lake, I'm sorry, Cross Lake. Caddo Lake, we would drive to Oil City to go swimming, you know, but Cross Lake you couldn't swim in.
Why couldn't you swim there?
I don't know why we couldn't, but they didn't allow it. Now, for one thing, it was the source for the water for all the area, but I don't know why we weren't allowed to swim in it, but we weren't.
You told us earlier that you had met your husband here and married Lyndall.
I actually met him in Texarkana. Lyndall worked for the railroad. He was the welder for the Frisco Railroad at that time. And I had a girlfriend that, she had a friend that worked for the railroad down at Ashdown. And they told me they had somebody they wanted me to meet. They said that he was like a funeral, what do you call them? Funeral manager or something. Something way far out. I had no idea he worked for the railroad, but anyway, they said that he was always having to come down to Ashdown, and so I said, sure, I'd meet him. And when I met him, well, of course, the truth came out that he was just, you know, a welder for the railroad, and he didn't work for any funeral home. But, and I guess we liked each other, and he started, you know, coming to, I had moved to Atlanta, Texas from Shreveport. I was trying to keep my children away from drugs and alcohol by moving out of Shreveport to a smaller town, but it was there too, so it didn't matter. But anyway, he started coming down to Atlanta, and we'd go to Texarkana and eat and go dance, and we had a lot of fun. And then he asked me to marry him, and so I had to wait till January to move here because I didn't want to get my children out of school, you know. And this was about a year later, and I moved down here in January. And we got married in May because his divorce was not final, you know, and then when it was final, we got married.
What can you tell us about his family or what his heritage and background is?
Okay, Lyndall's father, Baji Lloyd Finch, was a white man. His mother, Leola Priscilla Thorpe, was, I guess she was probably half Choctaw and a quarter Chickasaw. And she told me that when she first got her certificate degree of Indian blood, that they wouldn't let her have her Choctaw part. But times changed later on, and she got to claim her Chickasaw part. Leola was an excellent cook. I mean, she was just excellent cook, and she was a hard worker, and she had 10 children. One of her children had been killed in an accident. I never knew him. I think his name was Baji Lloyd Jr. And he was killed when, I guess he was home on leave, I don't really know. And then Lyndall was the oldest child, and he was a hard worker. He worked on the railroad, and he also farmed, and we always had plenty to eat.
Cecilia, tell us what area of the county that you lived in, and what are some interesting stories can you tell about that area?
All right, well, I live 4 miles west of Goodland Home on the, I guess it's called the Goodland Road. That's what I was told it was called, the Goodland Road. We had a small ranch, I think it was about 200 and something acres, and we farmed it, and we had cattle, and now it's not farmed or no cattle at all, but in the last 40 years, the last 10, it's not been anything done to it. The area is a very historical area, actually. It includes the Goodland Home. I think they call it the Goodland Academy now. But when I first came here in 1976, it was still an orphanage type home, or a home for people that had been mistreated, or, you know, and it was co-ed at that time, and they had house parents, and I remember this one little boy, all I remember, his name was Junior. And my children went to the little small Goodland Elementary School that's a public school at that time. And so did the Goodland children, whatever age group. Some went to Grand if they were older. Others went to that little, you know, secondary school, I guess you'd call it. And he liked to play with my children. So he was, several times he would just run away, and he'd always come to our house, and he'd like to go fishing with the kids, and I would call Goodland and tell him, because he'd just ride the bus home with him, and I knew he wasn't supposed to, so I'd call Goodland and tell him that, you know, he's here and he's fine, and he's fishing and playing with the kids and everything. And they were really nice about it. They said, well, we'll come get him a little bit later if it's okay. And so it happened several times, but that was a shining light in that little boy's life. He got to be not just a Goodland Home person, he got to be a kid. And then I remember that there was, I can't recall their names, but there was 2 Indian boys that was more my son's age, and they were hard workers, those boys were, and you'd always see them together, and I always thought that they would probably go on and grow up and become something, you know, an asset to a community, but I don't recall their names. I remember there was an old post office there that was supposed to be Chief LaFleur's home, and it used to be across Goodland Road on the north side of the road, and then later on they moved it to the Goodland campus on the south side of the road. And I understand from what Baji had told us that used to be the post office. You know, even though it was the chief's home at one time, it was also a post office at one time. And I thought that was very interesting. And then Baji also told us that there was 3 Indian graves on the land, and they're near our first pond. When you first come into the land, it was near there under some old bodark trees. And I could never, of course we didn't dig them up or anything, but you could see the mounds back then. But they were just, you know, they were deteriorating because they've been there so long. I don't know how long they've been there. And Baji said he dug into them. He said he got a silver platter out of one of them, and that he had given it to Bob Holly to take care of. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. That's what I was told by Baji. And then if on the Goodland Road, if you head west, there was an old pool back in there. I don't know who it belonged to, but I remember there was a pool back in there, and the kids left to go there and go swimming. I was scared to death for them to go swimming. I didn't even let them go swimming in our pool, you know. I was horrified of water moccasins and things, but it didn't seem to bother any of them. They'd slip off and go anyway. And then, let's see, right close to that pool, or maybe it would be further west, was a cemetery, the Cold Spring Cemetery. And it had earlier dates on the tombstones, like in the 1800s. And it looked like it was unkempt. Nobody took care of it, you know. And I always was interested in that cemetery because the tombstones were rather attractive, you know. And then as you keep going west, there used to be, I don't know what town it was called, but there was, I guess it was Cold Springs Presbyterian Church. And the old building was still there at that time. I don't know if it still is or not, but at that time, and there was a store also next to it, like a shotgun store. Okay, I want to be sure that I'm telling it right. It's hard to remember, but I found that, you know, quite interesting. You know that, and I can't remember that Indian man's name that supposedly hung witches. Now, somebody else will have to expand on that because I don't remember his name. But supposedly...
Hotima.
Hotima, yes, that's correct, Hotima. And, but that's another story as far as Hotima goes. I can remember that Baji and Leola, I didn't always work. When I first came here, I only substituted at Grant. And their principal had an illness that he was, you know, trying to fight, and some days he could work and some days he couldn't. So someone else would become the principal, and I would take that teacher's spot, you know, temporarily. And the best I remember, I could only work so many days, and then I had to switch spaces, you know, to another teacher's spot. Baji and Leola liked to go and hunt dewberries, blackberries, whatever we could find. And so in the hot summertime when I wasn't teaching, well, that's what we would do. We'd go picking berries, and then we'd already started the garden and everything. Then it was time to start canning, and that's what I did. I canned and froze food. And then one experience I had that I didn't like, but I learned from it, but I never did it again. We raised a bunch of pullets to kill and put in the freezer. Well, I didn't know how to kill a chicken, had no idea, and I wasn't going to touch one, you know. So you have to remember, I was raised in the city, and I didn't really know these things. But Leo and Baji and Lyndall, we all got together and we had an old wash pot and we boiled the water so we could dip them. And Leola would wring their necks and then we'd dip them. Then it stunk something terrible plucking those feathers. And it almost turned me against chickens. And so we didn't do that anymore. I'll just buy my chickens at the store. And Leola's one sister was named Lucille, and she had married this guy named Arlie Tittle. He was from Alabama, and because he was from Alabama, they have a worse drawl than people in this area, or even any place in the South. They just have a really strong drawl, and he liked his chalk beer. Okay, and every time he'd get in his cups too much, he'd start talking about the elephants that got out. Now, like I said, these elephants, I wasn't here when the elephants got out, but he'd hear things like maybe the old cows would get in the trash or something and start rummaging around, and he'd say, "Them dadgum elephants are here again." And I can't speak like he did, but it was comical. It really was. So somebody else can tell the history about how the elephants got out. Let me see, what else did we do? We'd like to go down to the dam and go fishing. Actually, we could fish in our own pond a lot. On summer nights, sometimes we would all, and I say Lyndall and I and his children and my children, we'd all walk to this little store that was about, maybe a mile and a half, 2 miles, to a store that was, Ruth Wilson ran it, and we'd buy us a pop. And that's what we would do for entertainment. We would, at night, to be cool, we'd walk there. And she'd always open up and buy us a pop. We'd buy pops and things. And we loved doing that. People do funny things to entertain themselves, but that's what we would do in the summer.
So Cecilia, tell us a little bit about what it is that you're currently doing today. I know you're a businesswoman here in town.
I'm an accountant, and I do bookkeeping, tax preparation, payrolls. I actually started out in my early years in the late 60s being a bookkeeper. I learned to keep books by hand, and then I advanced as technology advanced. I got to graduate to a Burroughs bookkeeping machine. And then now I will say that today's methods are much better, much better. When I first moved to Hugo, in 1980, I went to work for Dale Hammonds, who was a CPA here, and I worked for him for about 8 years. And then Hubert Barker, who had started a bridge company, he needed a bookkeeper. And so he would bring his books to me in a box every month, and then, I would do his books at Dale's. And then computers came along, and that were, he bought me my first computer. I can remember it so well. It cost $4,000, and it was a little old bitty 20 gigabyte, but anyway, that's what I used to do his books on. He bought it for that purpose, So that's what I did. But his business really expanded and became very successful. And so he talked to Dale without my knowing it, wanting to know if he thought that I would come over there and just work there, because it was just, it was getting to where, I was having to go over there to, more often and more often. And so they presented that to me. They didn't ask me. They just told me, that, he'd like for you to come to work for him, and he said he'd make it worth it, So I went with him. And I worked for Hubert for 26 years. I learned all about building bridges. The paper part, like cost accounting and all that. And I also learned what all goes into a bridge, and it's very interesting. I mean, really. And then Hubert told me that he said, when we get to be 75, we need to get out of here. Well, all during this time, I still had a tax business going on, but I only got to work here nights and weekends. But I love income taxes, so I just limited my clients because, you can just do so much. I also was in the midst of raising a grandson and making sure that, he had a good home and, everything. And so I left when I was 75, and I went to, being full-time at this office. And I started my business in 1988, and it's still going strong in 2020. Back in 1984, I know this is out of sync, but back in, I think it was 1984, because I graduated in 85, I wanted that college degree that said that I was, had a degree. Although I'm doing the same work I always did, I just wanted that little piece of paper. So at 39, I graduated from college with the Bachelor of Science, and I was very proud of that. But I still do the same thing I always did, but I guess that's being, I don't know, it was my ego. I wanted that piece of paper, and I got it. And I was very pleased with myself because I worked and went to school too and raised kids too. But I'm happy doing my work. That's all I can say. I love my job, and I don't even plan to retire. I plan to be here until I can't be here.
Sounds like you had lots going on during your life, raising a family, getting a degree, starting a business and everything. You were very involved, it sounds like, in the community. I understand you established the first genealogical society in the county. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it seemed like, now I'd have to think back when it got started, but it had to be in the late 70s. People didn't seem to be interested in genealogy, and I love genealogy. I mean, I've been doing genealogy since 1968. Prior to that, I really wasn't that much interested in it. I'd ask my mother questions or something, but other than that, no. But I got interested in it, and I drug my little old kids around to cemeteries with their little steno pads and having them write down numbers and names and things. And then, thank goodness it's not that way now, but back in the early 70s, it was that way. You did it pencil and paper. I guess I could have taken pictures, but I really couldn't afford the film, to tell you the truth. But we had Miss Shelton was a member, Benita Magar, Patsy Robertson was a member. I'm trying to remember all these people. Marilyn O'Keefe, she was a member. Vera Shelton. There was many more. I just can't remember all their names. And for some reason, I got disinterested. That's probably when I decided to go back to school, And so Marilyn O'Keefe and Vera kind of took it over and went from there. And I don't know, I guess it finally just, went the wayside. It's not there now, as far as I know. But we do have a new genealogy society that's been active for many years. And I'm a member of that society, which I love all the people there and what we do. I really enjoy it. I've been on the Choctaw County Library Board for over 4 years now. And I'm also on the Mount Olive Cemetery Board. I've only been there a couple of years. And that's the extent. I'm very active in my church. I enjoy my church. And I try to be a good citizen, and help my neighbors and friends and co-workers, whatever,
And think you certainly are a good citizen. Certainly you're so active in the community. What are some things that you, just to wrap up, what are some things about this county that you would like to share with people who aren't from here?
Well, Choctaw County is the wintering, or sometimes is the permanent home of several circuses. They also have an elephant, I don't know what it's called, but you know, it's protecting the elephants. They have that is available for people to see. And then we have the most unique cemetery that I've ever seen. It has circus people have an area that they're buried in, and then there's the local cowboys that, you know, is just, they're like Frost, Lane Frost, he's buried there. The bull rider from Soper. Freckles Brown. And there's others out there. One day I was walking through there and I saw this lady. She was 100 years old, and I'm sorry, her name doesn't come to. Yes, it does. Effie Riggins. She could play the piano like I don't know what. She was great with the piano, and I believe she was a school teacher. Now, she had the most beautiful penmanship. She was one of those people that was probably taught school or in the 20s, and her penmanship was just, it was so artistic and beautiful. And that's what I remember about Miss Riggins, you know, that she could play the piano and had a beautiful penmanship. Other than that, I can't remember some of the names, but out by Goodland there was a lady that had beautiful penmanship, but I can't remember her name.
And out by Goodland too, there's that old cemetery that's out there.
Oh yeah, I forgot about the Goodland Cemetery. It's probably one of the older cemeteries here in Hugo, or in Choctaw County, as far as I know. I'm sure that Fort Towson Cemetery or Dokesville Cemetery may be older, but the Goodland Cemetery is pretty old. I don't know the dates of it, but it has a lot of unique people buried out there that are historical people. At one time, to the best of my knowledge, there was two Goodlands. There was this Goodland that's south of Hugo, and then there was the Goodland that's north of Hugo. Like around the Spear Road, there's that Goodland. Now, I don't know, they probably were just a watering hole for the trains, you know. Not the Goodland on the south, it was where missionaries had came here. But the one north, I feel like, was probably, had a water tank there for the trains, and that was why it was there. But then, you know, I don't know the story to that Goodland. But Choctaw County has also an awesome depot that you can see. It was the Frisco Depot, and it is so awesome. They have all kinds of historical items in there, pictures, and I guess he's called the curator. I don't know what he's called. What do you call a historian that runs? Norm Pence, he has a lot of history. I mean, he's just full of history, and he can tell you things that I never would have thought of, you know. So Choctaw County, to me as a whole, has a lot to offer. And as you go east, well, there's always Dokesville, Fort Towson. They all have their own history. There's Frogville. It's a very interesting place if you research it. It was mostly like a plantation down around Frogville that just people grew probably cotton back in the early days. Now they mostly, you know, they have soybeans or hay, or, you know, that's what they grow now. But back in the 1860s, I'm sure they grew cotton, because at that time the river was still navigable and they could, you know, ship it. But other than that, my experience with Choctaw County is that I really like living here, and it's really interesting.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. We appreciate your time today.